I wanted Souvla to do one thing and one thing well. The thing that I wanted to do really well was sandwiches. The irony, right, is that we now sell more salads than sandwiches.
Yeah, I'm a fan of the salads
by a very very large margin. So it's always, but that is always very much the case with entrepreneurs and things you go set out to do. The thing that ends up being the most successful is not always necessarily the thing that you set out to do.
All right, we're live with Charles Bililies. I wanted to make sure I said that correctly, right?
You're very close. Bililies, yes.
Bililies. It's okay. My last name is Tsentsiper, and no one can pronounce it.
I was going to say, I think you're the only person I met that has a more complicated last name than mine.
Well, guys, I am so excited for this episode. Charles is the founder, CEO of the one and only Souvla here in the Bay Area. Probably one of my favorite concepts that I've come across. Best fries, best sauces, and in preparation for this episode, I took my team the other day to the Valencia location, and I had them try one of every single ice cream. And that was the first time that they were at Souvla. So I was very excited to have them in preparation for this episode to get some inspiration. So Charles, tell us a little about yourself. Tell us a little about the concept and how did you get into this crazy business?
Well, I'll take the last question first, I guess. I'm probably one of the few people that actually went to school for all this stuff. So in many ways, I've been in restaurants and hospitality for more than half my life at this point. Grew up on the East Coast in a family a small Greek family where so much sort of centered and revolved around food. My grandfather actually ran restaurants in the greater Boston area many years before I was born. We refer to that as BC, before Charles. And my other grandfather was came to the US from Greece and was just one of those really naturally talented cooks. So even though it sort of skipped a generation with my parents, food and cooking has always just been a, lifelong passion, and certainly always extended into restaurants, where my first spoken words and complete sentence was actually ordering lunch. True story.
That's crazy.
So now that you know all of that stuff,
I have to stop you there. What did you order? I had to stop you there. What did you order?
It was so my parents took their sort of first vacation with me. I was probably, I don't know, I was less than 2 years old, and they were hanging out at the poolside and at this little cafe, and the waitress walked up to the table, and without missing a beat, I turned to the waitress and said, "Hamburger, French fries, lemonade." Obviously in a little bit more of a kiddish voice, but literally ordered lunch. Yeah, and those were my first spoken words.
Amazing. Continue. That was awesome.
So yeah, that's a little bit about me. But yeah, went to school for this stuff, culinary school, hotel school, moved to California now almost 20 years ago to work at a little restaurant in the Napa Valley called the French Laundry. And so that was coming after a good 5+ years of cooking on the East Coast. And so started to sort of segue out of kitchens, not entirely, but I was Thomas Keller's very first culinary assistant. So it was a really, really cool job that I got to create that I think still exists to this day, that really got a lot of exposure for me for all aspects of that operation, not just the kitchen. So, and then ended up sort of on some special projects, including developing a management training program for them where I eventually became a dining room manager of the more casual Bouchon Bistro. And so that was my first sort of more service-oriented role. I moved to the city 2008 to get into restaurant development right when the economy tanked, and ended up working for Chef Michael Mina as his culinary assistant, and then went to go open RN74, which was his Burgundian-themed restaurant, in what was supposed to be a temporary sort of like, let's get this restaurant open role, and then ended up becoming the assistant general manager there. It was in 2010 that I had the idea for Souvla. I was living in the inner Richmond of San Francisco, in a place that had a backyard. We ended up having a sort of a potluck sort of barbecue. I had a spit, as any good Greek boy would. We ordered a whole lamb from the restaurant, and we invited a bunch of friends over, and roasted a whole lamb and had this big sort of outdoor daytime party. In the sort of the aftermath following day, cleaning up, I found myself with a bunch of leftover spit roasted lamb meat, and someone had brought some pita bread, and someone had brought a tomato salad, and I made myself a leftover sandwich, and the light bulb went off. And it really started around the question of like, man, this is delicious. Why can't I find this anywhere? And then it's like, why has no one updated or modernized the gyro sandwich? And so the path to Souvla is sort of told in two sort of parallel paths there, with the product obviously being like, let's look at this sandwich, which on its fundamentals, with the warm, fluffy pita, the cool yogurt, the roasted meat, the fresh vegetables. What happened to this, in the US, since it came here in the 70s? And why is it this kind of mystery cone meat that, when you have it, you sort of fluctuate pretty wildly between this is delicious and I'm going to be sick.
Right.
Why can't we look at this through a 21st century lens, being in California with access to just the absolute best product in the world, and really elevate this ethnic sort of comfort and or street food? And so it started really with the sandwich. And then on the service side, when you think about how a sandwich like that is traditionally sold, it's in some sort of a deli or a cart. Or, obviously this was the rise of the more conventional fast casual with your serve lines and things like that. And at the time, I had a, pretty extensive fine dining background. So I was like, well, who said that we had to do it this way? Why can't we elevate, in addition to elevating the product, why can't we elevate the guest experience alongside of it? And so that is really what came out of it, was what we call fast fine, which Souvla very much sort of pioneered this sort of elevated approach to fast casual, right? Where there's no serve line, your food is brought to your table in, beautiful blue and white enamel trays and bowls. We have a wine program. Your wine is served in stemmed wine glasses. Someone busses your table. There's a lot of attention to detail with respect to all of the service touch points, the design of the restaurant. If you come in the evening, the lights are down, there's candles on the table, everyone's drinking wine, and it, looks and acts and feels like a full service restaurant, and is nice enough that you would bring a date there. And we've proven that out many times over, because pre-COVID, we actually got into the wedding business. We found that a lot of our guests were reaching out to us because they went on their first date at Souvla, or they met at line at Souvla, or things along those lines. And they wanted to sort of integrate the brand and the product into arguably the most important day of their lives.
Love that. What do Greek people think of when they go to Souvla?
It's a great question. Souvla is a direct reflection of my complicated relationship with my Greek heritage. I am American born to Greek parents. My mother immigrated here to the US from Greece in the mid 70s, but I guess the term now is elder millennial. So I'm still of a generation where my immigrant parents wanted my sister and I to be normal American kids. So we grew up with a lot of the culture and the traditions and things along those lines, but we unfortunately did not grow up speaking the language at home. My parents really prioritized us, becoming American and being American. And so in thinking about and creating Souvla, I wanted Souvla, and I still do want Souvla, to be for everyone. Right. And so you see that a lot in who we are and what we do, especially with respect to the menu. There is a blend of us taking some creative freedoms with creating products that are inspired by Greek cuisine, utilizing Greek products, obviously also utilizing a lot of local products as well. We don't, in any of our marketing or any of our, how we talk about the brand, we never use the word authentic, traditional, any of those things, because we're not. We have a lot of authentic and traditional things as part of the brand, but broadly speaking, this is sort of modern Greek cuisine through a California lens, and obviously just a very, very small subset of it, right? Because we deal in sandwiches and salads and frozen Greek yogurt. It's a very simple, streamlined menu, which obviously I'm sure we're going to talk about. But I wanted, I feel that when you go to restaurants that have a point of view from a certain cuisine, especially one that involves a different language, people get a little nervous around, either not knowing what it is or how to pronounce a word or things like that. So take our wine list, for example. We have the country's only all Greek beverage list, down to the sparkling water. So everything we bring in from Greece. And we have a partnership with 3 different wineries. I would say 3 of the best wineries in Greece that produce wine under the Souvla label. featuring native Greek grapes, right? These native Greek grapes are unusual, right? You're not used to seeing them, and they're difficult to pronounce, right? So it's a hell of a lot easier for you as a guest to come in and say, let me get a glass of Greek red, as opposed to saying, I would like a glass of agyoritico, right? Like that just doesn't roll off the tongue in the way that it rolled off my tongue. So to answer your question, I think that I think when we do see people, Greeks in from Greece, it sort of depends on where they are, right? If they're Greek like I am, call it, second generation, if you will, I think there's a lot of admiration for the fact that obviously we have been championing this culture in this cuisine now for 11 years. And so there's a lot of little things that sort of tug at people's heartstrings. I think with respect to Greeks coming from Greece, I think it's interesting because also it's quite a bit different from anything that you see in Greece. I sort of maintain that like we could probably open a Souvla in Athens and stand out from every other souvlaki place because of how different our menu is. And for those that kind of turn their nose up at it, we have things for them, right? Our avgolemonos soup, right? A traditional Greek egg lemon soup is, I would say,
Pretty
the real
authentic.
deal. I mean, we've gotten a lot of feedback over the years where like, this is better than my grandmother
Yeah.
would make. So there's things like that. Obviously, things like the Greek beverages, we bring in these little sodas by Luke's, and it's like, for the Greeks, which there's a large community here, especially down in the South Bay. A lot of Greeks from Greece that are working in tech and things like that. They don't have a lot of those places to remind them of home, and like to go to a place where we serve their favorite soda, or they can have their avgolemono soup, or things along those lines. Really, still resonates with them.
I love it. I find that extremely bold that you're able to, be authentic to not only to the Greek heritage and culture, but unique to yourself. Like you're a California man at this point after being here for 20 years. And California does create this beautiful blend of so many different cultures. And we have some of the best products. We have the best wine. We have some of the best people. And you create this like melting pot of, what I believe is like an amazing amalgamation of all of these parts of you. One of my secret powers, or maybe one of my unfortunate effects that I've developed over the years, is whenever I go into a restaurant, I always think about how much money they're making, how their operation is, where are they missing out on, and I just like hyper fixate on everything. And when I actually first went to a Souvla, I was blown.
That makes two of us, Daniel.
I'm sure working for Thomas Keller, I'm sure that you became, and also going to Cornell, I'm sure you think about the bottom line. What blew me away is that this fast fine label that you attach to Souvla is like perfectly encapsulates how I felt walking in for the first time. It is absolutely at the menu, looking at the menu, it's very simple. You got the salads, you got the pita. And I can already tell that the ingredient list isn't as crazy as like a sit down restaurant. You have the ice cream bar all the way on the side, so it's very easy, to get you even have a window. If you just want ice cream, you just get it in and out. You have table service, but it's not pretentious where they're coming up to you asking, it's not full service dining, but you still have that hospitality element of it. Walk us through some of those nuances of like the ingredients, the menu, how you kind of engineered that, and behind the scenes, like the operation side of things, because I find that to be like fascinating.
Sure. Let's start with the menu. I'm a fundamental believer that people don't actually really want choice. They kind of want to be told what to have. You obviously need to give them some degree of selection, but you're generally there for like the core sort of signature-ish item. I think when going back to the origin story around like thinking about where a product was served, a lot of these like delis and markets, and you go in and they're Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, whatever, and they have these massive menus, right? You're just confounded with just like too much selection and you don't really know where to go. So we made it really, really easy over there. I think one of the big things, and a big reference point for us, certainly back then and still to this day, is In-N-Out, right? That's a brand that's 65 years old or something like that. They do one thing and they do one thing well. I wanted Souvla to do one thing and one thing well. The thing that I wanted them to do really well, was sandwiches. The irony, right, is that we now sell more salads than sandwiches.
Yeah, I'm a fan of the salads.
By a very, very a very, very large margin. So it's always, but that is always very much the case with entrepreneurs and things you go set out to do. The thing that ends up being the most successful is not always necessarily the thing that you set out to do. Right. That's kind of on the menu part. We wanted, for me, it was a lot about, again, elevating the experience. And so part of the thing with a serve line, your more classic Chipotle, Kava, Subway, what have you, is like, that's not really a great experience from a guest perspective. You're sitting there watching. Yes, you get to sit there and watch it be made for sure, but it's not the most elegant of things. And whereas, like, when you think about it in a restaurant, for the most part, you go sit down and you order the thing from the menu, and this dish comes out. And so I also just, again, with respect to the choice situation, it was important for me to have composed dishes. This sort of choose your own adventure that you oftentimes see in the more conventional QSR space doesn't always lead to the best results. If you go through a serve line, you have these. You're not only, it's like you have all this choice. What meat do you want? What sauce do you want? This. Often is the case. You end up with this thing that is like, well, none of this really works together, right?
Yeah.
We have created with Souvla these composed dishes that obviously on their own are really delicious, but we've also left open the opportunity, because things are obviously made to order. There's a lot of flexibility in the menu. In the early days when we first opened, 11 and a half years ago, people were really like awestruck at how small and simple the menu was, and they were really confused by it. They're like, "Wait, this is it? This is all you got?" And there was a little bit of a learning curve, and then all of a sudden, everyone like really embraced the quality, the value, the portion size, the fact that there was so limited choice. And then beyond that, they started to realize that it's like, oh, I can also, like, I've had all these things now. I like this thing, but I like to add this thing, or I like to omit that thing. So there's actually a lot of flexibility in there. And I always, whenever I meet people and mention Souvla, first off, what's really great is that it's usually met with as like, oh my God, I love Souvla, which is always, makes me feel
Yes.
great.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I always ask them I always ask people, what their order is, because everyone has their own little like hack or nuance or sort of tweak to what they do. That ended up being, 11 years ago, a really, differentiating factor. I think we've started to see more brands sort of embrace that, which I think is great. I said now, whatever, 15 years ago, when I first came up with the idea, I felt really strongly that this is the way that people want to eat in the 21st century, especially in, urban, markets where things are very expensive and time is precious and all of these things. We've like removed a lot of the barriers to entry of a more conventional mid-tier full service restaurant by offering, a simple streamlined menu that comes together really, really quickly, but also the versatility of how people interact with it. Because you have to understand, with an average Souvla, we serve on average somewhere between 600-700 meals a day per restaurant. But what's really great is that we're meeting people where they are, right? People you want to come in and bring your team for lunch. Cool. Like, we've got space for you. Come in, have a big fun lunch, right? It's just you and you got to get back to the office, whatever it is, you order online, you come and grab your sandwich, grab your salad, and you're in and out, gone, cool. You're bringing a date for dinner, like, great. Sitting on the couch and you're too lazy to leave your house, you order for delivery. We can be many things to many people in all of those ways. And I think that the guest really enjoys that as well, of that flexibility of how they interact. And lastly, there's just the pure economics of it, right? So one of the original questions back to the origin story is like, okay, how do I leverage my fine dining background, merge it in with this burgeoning sort of QSR segment that had become wildly popular, and, financially was an economic model that made a ton of sense. And then how do I then inject this sort of product into it? And so Souvla was the result. The reality is like, again, simple, streamlined menu. You sort of like infer to the fact that it's like you see a lot of cross utilization of product on there, right? So the amount of ingredients that we keep in house is fairly minimal. Our frozen Greek yogurt dessert offering, very efficient. It doesn't require a pastry chef or a lot of big production, things like that. A very unique product, the only, the first of its kind in the US, quite frankly, the world. The Greeks actually started to kind of do this a little bit after we came up with it. But really, at the end of the day, it's a volume game, right? So this is why, this is why there's not as many Souvlas as you may want there to be, right? We have to be very, very thoughtful about where we operate and really, the density that exists there. Because to my earlier point, if we're not serving 600-700 meals a day, weekends we do over 1,000 meals a day per restaurant. If we're not serving that many people, then the model just doesn't work, right?
Interesting.
And so, yeah. And so,
Is that
that's
mainly
where,
because of the location? Is that mainly because of San Francisco is so freaking expensive, or
yeah.
where do you see
I mean,
you need to fill in that gap?
a lot of it is just the operating costs, which are, we operate in San Francisco, which is arguably the most challenging and most expensive city to operate in America. And we also, from a culture perspective, since day one, we take absolute first class care of all of the folks that work at Souvla with respect to healthcare. Everyone has full health insurance at Souvla, full part time. Everyone has, we have a very generous 401k program. Everyone has paid vacation. We offer a level of benefit at Souvla at 6 units that large restaurant groups in the hundreds of units probably don't even do. Right. And so how are we able to afford to do that? It's the volume, right? The volume allows us to offer, really, really exceptional pay, all of these great benefits, all these things while keeping our labor costs very much at, or I would say sort of above industry standards with respect to above, below, however you want to look at it, relatively low labor costs, despite operating in a very, very expensive market.
I love it. Where do you see then growth ahead for you guys? Is it still going to be mainly in Northern California, or are you thinking bring it down to SoCal? Where are you seeing the growth?
Yeah, I mean, we have a competitive advantage, I guess, against a lot of our peers that operate elsewhere in the U.S. of the fact that we know how to operate in California and we can do it in a very profitable way because we were born here, right? And so this is what we know. I think if we were to go to any other city in any other state, it would probably be considerably easier. And I'm very blessed to have not only a great partner and chef in the business that's been with me since the beginning, but also 5 other folks that sort of live on our leadership team that oversee all of the operation, of which is all in house. Whether it's people, finance, operations, everything is in house and has been for quite some time. We're all based here, and so we still see a lot of opportunity to expand in the Bay Area in the years ahead. We've been looking for real estate for the last 2 years in the East Bay and the South Bay and a little bit in the North Bay. We are very, very particular about real estate. So it needs to be the right space, it needs to be on the right street, on the right side of the street, all of these things, check all of our
Sure.
boxes. So, we hope to find the next few Souvlas up here. We've started to kind of entertain a little bit about Southern California. I think there's a lot of opportunity down there. Obviously staying, inside the state really makes a lot of sense. A lot of it will come down to team. And if and when there are people that are interested in helping us bring Souvla down to Southern California and that are interested in moving down there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I remember you mentioned a lot of the teams, across the 6 or so locations, 11 years now, you've had the same, consistency in the people that have been with you along for the journey. And so that in order for you to open up a new location, most likely you're going to have to bring one of those teammates to champion that growth. So I respect that you keep your team close and you believe in their ability and you put a lot of effort there. To close this off, just from your experience, like I can see that you are a unique breed in that you bring in a lot of elements of the fine dining and your line cook experience and your hospitality background with Cornell, plus also just being a Californian. You have this really cool story and really cool concept along the journey. Who has really, really inspired you? Who do you think has had a pivotal moment in your career that has kind of put you where you are today?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. I mean, I think a lot of it stems from my upbringing and stems from my parents, both of whom were entrepreneurs and small business owners and ran their businesses out of the house growing up. So I think from birth, I had front row seats to what it takes to run your own business, to be an entrepreneur, the sacrifice, the grind, all of those things. So you can almost say that it's genetic to a certain extent, because the reality here, Daniel, is that this is not this is not an easy business. This is probably one of the most challenging industries to be in. It is also one of the most rewarding industries to be in. And I'll say this in terms of entrepreneurship, and this is a great line. I wish that I came up with it, but it's entrepreneurship is spending a few years of your life living like most people won't, so you can spend the rest of your life living like most people can't. The early days of Souvla, and I counted from idea, which was 2010 to inception of 2014, and even the first few years of Souvla were incredibly hard. I mean, the amount of rejection and effort and just grind and just defeat and all of these things were just really, 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 really challenging. It's funny because it's like, people now, they see Souvla, they see 6 locations, they see all this stuff. They're like, oh my God, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So great. It's like, it wasn't always like this. Like, this took an awful lot. But I think having my parents and sort of watching them build their businesses, which are not in the food space, but watching them build their businesses, watching what it takes with respect to just like the 24/7 on thing really kind of helped me prepare for the just immense sacrifice that you have to take in order to go out on your own and do whatever it is that you do want to do. The restaurant industry is uniquely, you're taking all of the challenges of entrepreneurship in and of itself, and then you're applying it to this industry of which you have to know an awful lot about an awful lot of things. What other industry, do you need to know enough about like plumbing and electrical and also human resources and how to cook and enough about wine and design and how to read a P&L service. and customer service and IT and this and whatever. So you end up becoming this sort of Swiss Army knife, which quite frankly, like prepares you to do, absolutely whatever you want. And when you think about the beating that restaurants have taken, in the last 5 years, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, And so what's really great now, and this is something that we've prioritized in Souvla since the beginning, is that, all those folks that I mentioned that oversee all the restaurants, alongside myself and alongside Tony, almost all of them have been with us for, I think the newest member of the team has been with the company for 7 years, so, and almost all of them have started in line level roles. So they understand the operation really, 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 really intimately. And then they're now also in a place to be able to have this level of oversight. And for them, this level of freedom, with how they operate. So I'm very, very fortunate for that.
Charles, thanks for staying in the game. Thanks for making an amazing product and, being a core part of our community in San Francisco. We're very grateful for you.
Oh, thanks for thinking of me, Daniel. Yeah. Pleasure to chat with you. Have a good day.